If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan, and in for Amy this morning is John Aria Cass Stark.
That's right.
Chicago Tribune.
I'm a 13-year-old killer girl.
John,
Changing faces.
on Obamacare replace, that's not coming to pass because it doesn't have the votes. One of the Republican senators, West Virginia's Shelley Moore Capito, said in explaining her opposition to just voting for a straight repeal with a 2-year window to figure out what the replacement looks like, even though she previously voted for the straight repeal just 2 years ago, she won't do it again because, quote, as I've said before, I did not come to Washington to hurt people. Although she did when she spoke at the 2016 Republican convention, pledged to, quote, turn the tide from a Washington that tells us who our doctors are and delivers a lower quality of care, unquote. So if you can square the circle of those two statements, then you're more of a logician than I am, and a magician.
Hypocrisy, consistency, and the hobgoblin of little minds.
Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
So it's not foolish to expect a Republican senator who voted against Obamacare to repeal it in 2015 to stand up for it now that there's no Obama safety net, where you can't expect you know that he's not there to veto it.
It's
save me from myself.
Well, it's
Will
interesting.
someone rid me of these meddlesome selves of mine?
It's interesting, the parallel between the Madigan Republicans here and the Obamacare Republicans in D.C. because they use the same rhetoric. Their defense of surrender to big government, really, and sometimes not even surrender. That's where they really are. They are government-centric Republicans. They care about crises in the public sector to the exclusion of the crises they inflict on the 95% of people outside of the government sector.
Who pays them? Who sends them to Washington? Who
well, right.
Okay.
But the parallel, that's exactly what you heard from those 15 Republicans in the House, from the one Republican senator who voted for the Madigan tax increases without spending reforms just a couple of weeks ago. People are hurting. We're not here to hurt people. You're not here to hurt people. You have the worst governed state in the country, in the history of the country, really, the worst governed city. The burdens you're imposing, you're pushing people who don't want to leave out of this state. You're pushing people who don't want to leave their homes out of their homes. You're destroying people's home equity. You're negatively impacting their ability to send their kid to college, to have a good job, to save money for retirement. You're doing all those things, but as long as we're advancing Leviathan, then we're good people. That's essentially what they're saying, and this is why you had the Trump revolt, and this is why we need an Illinois revolt, but it has to be stoked.
Well,
it has to rally around a human visage, a carbon-based life form. That's what we need in this state.
Well, I'm waiting to see if the governor's going to be that person. In the meantime, as far as this goes, when Republicans tell me that government can't afford a tax cut, these are the same types. The same type.
And now, after they've surrendered, those handful of Republicans that were lying to you, just like at the state level here, now what happens? Who fills? Because power hates a void.
Oh, yeah.
It gets filled. So now, ride to the rescue. Chuck Schumer, I'm here to work constructively on improving Obamacare. And moderate centrist Republicans, the Tuesday group, are going to meet with moderate Democrats, whatever that looks like in the 21st century, to talk about how to fix Obamacare.
Right. They're like
Yeah.
the Senate, the Roman Senate, right before Sulla moves his legions into the city.
They're like the Illinois Senate.
Okay.
For more
Sulla.
on the health insurance matter and what happens now with Obamacare in force, We're pleased to be joined by our friend C.Steven Tucker, C.S. Tucker, founder and principal broker for healthinsurancementors.com and a health insurance market expert. Steve, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, gentlemen.
So what's the world going to look like in 6 months and a year if Obamacare in its current manifestation stays as is?
We're in trouble. As you know, we are down to 3 health insurance carriers that offer products in the state of Illinois. We currently do not have access to the top teaching hospitals, Northwestern, University of Chicago, Rush, and the Anna Robert Laurie Children's Hospital. And we just lost the only carrier left that offers access to the Anna Robert Laurie Children's Hospital, and that's Harkin Health. They lost $63 billion in 12 months, and they are now gone. So now that the Republicans have failed to do what they promised to do for 7 years in a row, we are now faced with an ever-dwindling market, and the only way we're going to get these health insurers back is if the president authorizes continuation of what's called CSRs, or cost-sharing reduction payments. And these payments are used to artificially reduce deductibles and copays for people below 250% of the federal poverty level. That is what the insurance companies are begging for. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning where the insurance companies are now deciding what are they going to do, because we do not have a replacement bill, we don't have any certainty, and we have a risk of losing the CSR payments because they have not been authorized by Congress. So what's going to happen now, because the pathetic surrender party has not done what they should have done and promised to do, we're now going to be handing over, in my estimation, hundreds of billions of dollars to the insurance industry with no Medicaid reforms, with no option to purchase non-Obamacare qualified plans, which is what the Cruz Amendment would have allowed us to do. None of these things are going to happen now. We're just going to simply bail out the health insurance companies once again, and that's what's going to have to happen. Otherwise, we will have no insurer options. We're now looking at 44% of the counties in this nation with no health insurance carrier, or maybe one insurance carrier, and 3 states currently facing none at all.
Well, so
3 entire states.
Right, and so there is this provider of last resort, which is quickly becoming the provider of first resort, and that's the federal government. So does this crisis just move us closer to European style or Canadian style single payer?
Yes, which was the eventual goal. I mean, we've wiped out now 88 health insurers in the matter of 36 months, which is a remarkable destructive powers of Obamacare. And so we are looking at a situation where not only do we have fewer and fewer options in the individual market, but we're looking at a situation where 3 states right now, 3 entire states in our union, have no health insurance option for next year. None.
So this is all the jargon aside. What happened was the insurance companies got what they wanted, right?
Well, in the end, they probably will, John, because
right.
The only option to bring them back is to hand them hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer dollars. I mean, if the government today mandated that car insurance must be covered, right, or you face a penalty, which, by the way, the penalties on individuals and employers, all of the taxes, they're all still there. The President of the United States cannot repeal a law via an executive order. The executive order that was issued in January by President Trump instructed the IRS to hold off on collecting the fine until a new law was put in place in order to reverse codified IRS law. Well, guess what? Thanks to the failure party, we now have no new codified law. So those fines on individuals for not buying health insurance are coming back. We're still going to be a part-time nation. But my point was, if the government said, hey, car insurance has to be mandated and you can buy it after you wreck your Maserati, there is no way that State Farm or any other PNC carrier would offer products in the car insurance market mandated by the federal government without hundreds of billions of dollars from taxpayers. So that's exactly what's going to happen, John. They're going to get more and more money.
So this is the argument that Holman Jenkins makes about the failure in the Wall Street Journal. He writes, Republicans and American voters don't want an individual mandate. They do want coverage of pre-existing conditions. There's a term for a system in which you're covered if you're sick, but you don't need to buy coverage, and the government promises to make it affordable. It's healthcare on demand with taxpayers footing the bill. It's single payer, at least for the sizable portion of the population who can't be induced through a giant tax incentive to accept insurance from their employer, or who are not already under some version of proto single payer, such as Medicare and Medicaid. Obamacare was a dog's breakfast, but at least it was coherent on this fundamental point. And essentially, he's arguing that the contradiction of the GOP position was fatal.
Yeah, here's the thing. When it comes to the issue of pre-existing conditions, what we were attempting to do was simply expand the rights that have been granted to 173 million Americans who buy their health insurance through an employer. Those people, 173 million Americans, have never, ever had to deal with pre-existing conditions because 1996 HIPAA law ensured that when they move from one employer-sponsored plan to the other, so long as they have no lapse of more than 63 days between those two employers, all of their pre-existing conditions are covered. And even if they couldn't find a new employer after losing a former employer's health insurance coverage, they were able to COBRA. Under the COBRA Act, they were able to continue their coverage for up to 18 months whilst they were looking for new employment. They never had to deal with pre-existing. It is a very small percentage of Americans, which has now grown to 23 million Americans, who buy individual health plans. And they are the ones who could have faced a pre-existing condition. However, 45 states, long before Obamacare, had a high-risk pool in place or an annual open enrollment period so that people, if they were denied in the individual market, were guaranteed coverage through that risk pool. We had it here in Illinois. It was called the Illinois Comprehensive Health Insurance Plan. It's just a pool of money that insurers were forced to contribute a percentage of their profits to in order to cover those people who were denied for their products in the individual market. So it was working. We could have made sure that the 5 states that did not have one of those mechanisms in place, which were violating federal law, had one in place instead of taking over the entire healthcare system. But we chose to take over the entire healthcare system. We didn't, but the Democrats did.
Let me ask this question, Steve. If they were able to get back to 50 in the Senate and just do a straight repeal with a prospective 2-year window, and that's ultimately where congressional Republicans wound up, with a straight repeal and the replace a matter for haggling for some time yet to follow. So we went back to a pre-Obamacare situation. What would that look like? Is that even possible? Can we go back to the future pre-Obamacare?
First of all, you have to have 60 votes in order to repeal a piece of legislation, not 50 votes. Not that we even have 50 votes, because as we found out yesterday, Murkowski, Shelley Moore Capito, and Susan Collins wouldn't even vote for that, right? So it's a fantasy that we're ever going to fully repeal Obamacare with the simple majority that we have now. That said, let's say that fantasy took place and we went back to, without any Obamacare disruption, right back where we were. Then what we would have to do is fix the 5 states that were violating federal HIPAA law. They had either robbed money that were in their high-risk pools for other things, which was illegal under the Federal Act to do, or they just simply ran out of money for those high-risk pools. If we would install a risk mechanism into those 5 states, then all 50 states would have had a risk mitigation program for those in the individual market, and it would have cost us an awful lot less than what we spent on Obamacare.
All right. He is C.Steven Tucker, healthinsurancementors.com. C.S. Tucker, a dismal day, but we appreciate your explanations and insights as always.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on the turnkey.pro. And so let's take a couple